We have a little time for questions if anybody has any. Otherwise, you get to go on break a little early.
Do you have a question?
Hi, thank you very much for your comments. My name is Dan Marcucci. I'm a professor of environmental and coastal planning at East Carolina University. Here's my question. I train undergraduates, and the economy's been really bad, and they all want jobs when they get out, and some of them are very good students. Where do you see our entry-level jobs for people wanting to go into this area these days?
It's a great question, and I thank you for asking that. You framed the question in a way that many of us encourage everyone in the environmental movement now to begin to frame their arguments, which is what is the relationship between our actions and the economic basis in this country? And jobs, of course, are an approximate way of describing it. I do believe that when all is said and done, the President's vision of investing in infrastructure in this country will win out. I simply think we don't have any choice. Our challenge is to make sure that green is included in that conversation. I'll give you one example. In the stimulus bill that was passed in the last Congress, almost $1 trillion was appropriated for infrastructure projects, and not one dime of it was for green infrastructure. And we need to change that equation. If we are able to make the case that green infrastructure is an economic driver for the future in this country, there will be lots of jobs. And one of the most interesting things that I think is open to young people today, unlike when I came up where you either had to be in a nonprofit or on the regulatory side, you can approach green infrastructure from the corporate side, as John Schaefer here does at NiSource, from the public sector side, as Neil Peterson does. I saw him just walk in, the Secretary of Transportation in Maryland. There are many pathways in, and once you're inside this network, it's far easier to move around. I think focusing on the relationship between infrastructure and environmental health is going to be a ripe area for jobs in the future. Anything else?
Larry, again, thank you for your comments. Ramesh Butch, Alachua County, Florida. One of the things I find is that the environmental community spends a lot of time fighting with itself. You know, you're not wild enough, you're too urban. How do you propose we solve some of those differences first and not let the other interests take the battlefield?
Boy, what a great question. You know, the environmental movement, you all know when the environmental movement began. People have different views on this. Some people say 1970 and Earth Day. I would pull it back a few years, 1962. You know what happened in 1962? Rachel Carson published Silent Spring, which for the first time brought human health and the environment together in the same sentence. And that linkage of human health and the environment unleashed a tidal wave of grassroots activism. There are over 50,000 pieces of legislation and regulation on the federal, state, and local books today as a result. Some major pieces of legislation, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, and all of these arose out of a very real and urgent need to correct wrongs of the past. The Cuyahoga River caught fire. Air quality, if anybody ever visited Pittsburgh 25 years ago, when you got back to your car, you had to put your windshield wipers on because of the amount of soot. And so the environmental movement was born out of a need to say no. A need to say no. And over the last 40 or 50 years, we have perfected the art of saying no. And we have a very poorly developed ability to say yes. The environmental movement has almost no capacity to describe the future that it wants, only the future that it doesn't want. And frankly, I think that the American people have passed us by. The environmental movement is in danger of becoming a less relevant part of the conversation just when we need it the most. And this talk about green infrastructure, framing our arguments about how we relate economic and environmental objectives, and how we paint a picture the shining city on the hill. That is our single greatest challenge going forward. So I agree with you. I think it's a sorry state of affairs. I think when times get tough, we tend to fall back on the worst of our learned behaviors as a movement. And it's only because of people like you here who have this forward-looking vision and the courage to act on it that I remain an optimist. I'm just an impatient one.
We'll take one last question.
Mike Rosen, City of Portland. It seems like to support the growth of green infrastructure, local, state, and federal government have to work as effectively together as possible. So I'm wondering what your opinion is on some of the things that local, state, and federal government are doing well, and what are some of the key things they need to improve on?
Boy, another good question. I think for some time that the leadership in the environmental field, and I use that term loosely, the environmental field, that the mantle of leadership passed from the federal government to state and local jurisdictions. I think that's true in government, and I think it's true in many ways in the nonprofit sector. The reason is that large monolithic institutions tend not to tap into the deep well of human ingenuity and creativity that provides for new ideas, new relationships, and new solutions on the ground. In this country, if we have any crisis other than of courage, I would say we have a crisis in creativity. And I'm very encouraged by what I see with respect to local communities taking matters into their own hands and solving problems. You're going to hear about a number of these. I mentioned Kevin Schaefer in Milwaukee, who's done fabulous things with the Green Seams Project. The mayor of Nashville, who I think is a true leader in this field, Carl Dean, talking about green infrastructure, meeting many of the needs of his city. And we need those ideas to put forward onto the larger platform. Mayors need to talk to mayors, county commissioners need to talk to county commissioners, governors need to talk to governors. Frankly, I find the disconnect between our elected leaders in Washington and what the American people actually say in poll after poll to be appalling. And so the leadership at the local level, where these ideas come from and the ability to act on them is real, has never been more important. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Larry. You can see why we're fortunate to work with him.